Well, in our last discussion, we are talking of monistic theory of sovereignty. That was, the philosophers were trying to say that sovereignty is undivided and indivisible, it is permanent, and should not be tampered with. But since the end of the First World War, we find that the other point of view are coming to the front, and now the basic arguments is that it is really difficult to discover the location of sovereignty, and it is almost, so to say, an impossible adventure because of the change in the nature of the society. And lawmaking has become such a complicated process nowadays in the 20th century that it reminds us about Montesquieu's basic approach in his famous The Spirit of the Laws, that the origin of the laws are not single but diverse. Many factors combine together to produce a legislation, and therefore when law is enacted, it affects a large number of interests, and these interests feel strongly, and they have started feeling very strongly in the 20th century, that their views must not be neglected and they should have a share in exercise of the sovereign power. Hence, the pertinent point is that political nature of sovereignty should be taken into account. To start with, it must be made clear that unlimited sovereign power is nowhere existent, and as Lasky pointed out, the will of the state is for all practical purposes the will which determines the boundaries of other wills, and therefore will of the state is the will of the government as that will which is acceptable to the citizens. Everywhere the modern democratic government must submit itself to the judgment of those who feel the consequences of its actions. Therefore, the large number of social units, large number of social organizations who have their origins much earlier than the origin of the state, especially they refuse to accept the theory of indivisible character of the sovereign power. And this is what is generally known as the emergence of pluralist view of sovereignty. Citizens are members of the state. They are members also of a large number of associations which not only exercise power over their adherents but seek also to influence the conduct of government itself. Society is basically plural.
Sir, I have a question, sir. Sir, what is the meaning of pluralist theory of sovereignty?
And that is exactly what I am trying to elaborate now. Here, plurality implication of the word pluralist is this, that the nature of the society is plural, that is to say, the authority structure in the society is decentralized. It is not concentrated in one figure, one position. So, a large number of associations, they claim that they exist prior to the state, and the functions they discharge, they are of their own concern, and the state must not interfere.
Sir, I have also a question. If everyone tries to exert power, won't there be confusion? Won't there be anarchy everywhere?
Okay, I reserve answering this question now. Will come a convenient point of time when you will raise the point and you will get an answer. That's a very intelligent question, however. Now, basically what I am trying to say is that society by nature is plural, and The Western countries, Western societies especially, there are certain advances have been made which proves that the position of the pluralist are really important and should be defended, because they argue that it cannot be equated with the sovereign power, but they are authorities in their own right. I give one example and that will make the argument further clear. The organization of the church. Now, church came to dominate citizens' life much earlier than the emergence of the states. And church had its own point of view to the problems of life. Church had its own solutions. Church wants to exercise its control over its adherents, and therefore church insists that state must not interfere in matters ecclesiastical. It is a claim which was raised in the Middle Ages, no doubt, but in the 20th century, now along with the church, other institutions, for example, universities. Just forget about university in our country because they are all products of the modern time. But think of University of Paris, University of Berlin, Oxford, Cambridge, Heidelberg. They started their life much earlier than the emergence of the modern state. So they claim that it is their own life. In fact, there is a very common expression in English language because of this older origin of the universities, that there is distinctly a difference between town and the gown. Town means the people and the gown means the robes worn in the convocation of the universities. So the universities are organization in their own right. But when we think of these things, it is difficult for students like you of this generation. Now we are accustomed to the idea that everything will be dictated by the state. But forget about that. We are taking in the historical aspect. So now we find that the power of the groups, they are original and complete in their own right, and therefore they assert that they should be treated, at least they should be given some right to share the sovereign power. So this is the origin of the pluralist background of the emergence of the pluralist theory of the sovereignty. Just in one sentence it can be stated that pluralist theory of sovereignty is a conscious principled rejection of the monistic theory of sovereignty. And the main proponents in the 20th century of this point of view, there is a large number of people from different sectors of society. Jane Figes, Harold Lasky, E.T. Lindsay, Louis Duguay, Ernest Barker, and Mary Follett. Mary Follett from America, there are others from continent of Europe. Now, they insisted that properly distribution of social authority among the various groups is essential. In the 20th century, for example, the assertion of another, I have said about church, I have said about the universities, but in the 20th century, especially after the First World War, a very important institution has emerged which now claim in the West their independent right to have their own decisions so far as their members are concerned, so far as they think they have got an obligation to protect the interest of their members. I am talking about trade unions. Again, there is a really difference for Indian students to appreciate this point, because in India we see a completely different picture. Everybody, including trade unions, they are attached to some political parties and they abide by the leaders of the political parties. But the situation in England and in America, in France is completely different. The trade unions have their own decisions, own leadership, own point of view, and they fight for it and they establish it. So they say that where also when any legislation has to be made concerning the labor interest, we must be consulted. We must be consulted means we have a share in exercise of the sovereign power. I hope now it is only clear what I basically mean to say. Now the advocates of the pluralist theory, they believe, like I mentioned two great authorities, Gierke and Professor Maitland, they are very, very famous. Now they are concerned with legal and historical theory of corporations. Another term which is used in English or in French or German, corporations, that was a social body, corporate body. They are called corporations. From that, in fact, also local authorities of a higher grade we call corporations. Some are called municipalities, some are called corporations. Idea is this, that corporation enjoys more autonomy, more powers than the municipalities. That's the difference. That from the old link of the word, meaning of the word is there. That is, there is a corporate body. Now at this moment, that is beginning of the 21st century, we see the dominance of the corporate sector, private companies. They say that now we are also entitled to share in the sovereign power. So in this way, pluralism is a general statement. It is no one theory, but it is a generic theory of different points of view. But the common thing about the different points of view and the common thing about the different arguments used by them is this, that there are associations, there are institutions and organizations in society which are no less important than the state. But they all agree finally that state must not be abolished. And therein comes the relevance, the question, very right question you have raised, that pluralism may appear to be encouraging large number of groups in the exercise of sovereign power, and there could be a possibility of drifting towards anarchism. That is no, because these organizations, you just think of it, churches, universities, trade unions, corporate bodies, they don't want anarchy. So the philosophy of anarchism or abolition of state is not applicable here. What they want is limitation of state power. State's sovereign power should be limited. Nothing more than that. So there is no chance of anarchism emerging. Is all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So pluralist and including the economic groups, they are very assertive now that they must be given some share in exercise of sovereign power. Now I mention some of the authorities from different points of view. For example, Durkheim, the great sociologist, he pleads for recognition of ancient occupational associations, from which in the medieval period large number of guilds appeared, artisans, different kind of artisans. So Durkheim, the sociologist, they say that these bodies are also important. Then Figes, he stated that church, trade unions, local communities and local authorities. In Europe, especially in England and Germany, there is a strong political theory in favor of freedom of the local government as against the central government. So centralization and decentralization is a perennial debate in political theory, and that can be appreciated properly only in the background of the political history of the continental countries. If we look to the America, we find that here the sensitiveness about political autonomy is still greater. And there, as it is said, that America, United States, is the laboratory of local self-government. There is no one formula, one type of organization which is applicable to all. Different states, different regions in the United States, they assert that we are the local authorities. Now New York, its feelings and aspirations are completely different from Los Angeles. Pennsylvania does not agree with Detroit. So everybody is very conscious of what we have and what we must protect. I am repeatedly reminding you, forget about the Indian situation, because here there is a tendency of centralization from the Mughal days. Centralization. As I don't know, this is maybe a problem of social psychology of people as such. Maybe Indian people are social psychologically prone to accept the final lord or lady as our supreme governor or ruler. So this does not completely similar, not at all similar with the Western social psychology. Anyway, now we refer to Ernest Barker. Anybody in political science and political theory knows he's a quite famous person. Now he does not share all the points of the trade unions or university, etc., etc. But on one point he is quite assertive, is this, that these organizations have their own personality. Each is unique. Even you will be surprised to know that Oxford thinks I am separate from Cambridge. Cambridge thinks very sensitive that we are separate from Oxford. And they, both of them thinks that we are separate from Paris. So in this way they are very conscious. This they have, because of the Barker argument is that there is a sense of distinct personality of the organizations. So this, and they look at the society, look at the state as society of societies. These organizations are little societies of their own. And so when we think of state, Barker finally accepts that yes, state should be there. We are not going to accept anarchism, because after all, political stability is the key to social happiness. So if all organization wants to be happy and prosper, so naturally there is a need of a common adjustment center for better coordination. And state has to do that, but nothing more.
So state acts like a regulator.
Not regulator. Regulator means you regulate.
Okay.
Adjustment. Facilitator.
Mediator.
Mediator, yes. When two unions fight, then they bring them to a discussion table and mediate. What's the problem? How can I help you? This kind of attitude.
Okay.
But not that my fight is final. What I say, you accept and go. That is not pluralist. Basic spirit is this, that society concept of the state is that it is a society of societies. So this is the political philosophical point of view of Barker. When Lindsay is more or less the same, but he emphasizes on the closeness of the community feelings. And Mary Parker Follett is a basically organization person. She emphasizes again the personality point, that every organization should have its own psychology, and therefore management pattern also cannot be uniform. And you see in the corporate sector, for example, in our country, Tata's management system and the Builders management system or Ambani's management system, they are not identical. They are different types of things, because they have full freedom and autonomy to whatever way they want to do it. But if it is a government department, a rule must be there. So everybody must adhere by the rule. This is the basic difference, very simple way of stating these things. And another sociology, I start with Durkheim, the sociologist, another American sociologist, McIver. He also an adherent of this pluralist theory of sovereignty, and he says that the powers should be definite and powers of any institution must not be limitless. And it is for the state to see that there is no disorder in society. That's why state is indispensable. That is to say, what we say in political science or in law or in administration, that the concept of rule of law is the basis of democratic government. Rule of law. There should be a law framed on which there is unanimity, and then once it is accepted, once it is passed as law of the land, everybody, all organizations must abide by this framework. But that doesn't mean for example, let me give another example. When you are driving a car, when there is a red light, you stop. May I know why?
Because
Because that's
Because the
that's
traffic constable is so powerful.
not
Because
at
that
all.
is the rule.
Because that is the rule. That is the
Yeah,
law.
that means
That's
if obey the rule,
yeah.
that will facilitate traffic.
Exactly.
And when traffic is facilitated, the driver is benefited.
Yeah.
Accident is avoided. For our sake, we abide by the rules. Isn't it? Only the idiots won't accept the rules.
Exactly.
But anybody who thinks of one interest and interest of others, both self-interest and interest of others, both are served if we obey the traffic signals. Similarly here in the larger society, they say, if labor and capital constantly clash, there is no progress. But it does not mean that labor will always abide by the capital, or capital will be abiding by the dictates of the trade unions. Not at all. But they must realize what is the common interest. Common interest of the society, common interest of the nation. Now who will indicate that? That is the general parliament of the country. That is the state, the government, the sovereign. In that sense, sovereign. So pluralist theory of sovereignty is like this. When we come to still in recent times, that is round about Second World War and thereafter, we come across a point of view of G.D.H. Cole. He was also a professor at Oxford. He now gives his own political theory of syndicalism or rule of the labor unions in something like this, and guild socialism, a new term that he coined. He says that his emphasis is only on trade unions must enjoy autonomy. Trade unions in their functioning have to obey two authorities. First of all, general parameter of the state and the ruling authorities, but more important, they must have a democratic authority within the union, so that the secretary is not all powerful. But secretary's task is to discover the degree of unity, degree of agreement. That's why I am quite sure you don't know this. In India, it is the leaders who decide when there will be a strike by any union. In the Western countries, it is now established fact that to have a strike, not in a general strike or burn, but even a sectoral industrial strike, there must be ballot in which each labor will give its vote to indicate his agreement. Then only a call for the strike could be given. So these are civilizational differences in my mind, isn't it? How democracy does not mean only one thing. Democracy means so many things in so many countries at so many different times. So actually, this is the basic and fundamental issues of pluralist theory of sovereignty, which is distinct. I hope by this time it is clear, which is quite distinct from the approach of monistic theory of sovereignty.
Yes.
So I think we can conclude our discussion by noting the fundamental point that we discussed today is this, that pluralist theory of sovereignty is the latest theory of sovereignty that we find. And now we need further discussions that we can do in another episode. That is, what about the state of sovereignty when globalization burst in our life? So that will be another scenario that we will discuss.